One of the major characteristics of corporations is the separation of ownership and management of the business. The owners and managers of the corporation are a different set of people. This turns out to be an advantage of the corporate organizational form because it relieves the owners, the shareholders, of the burden of having to manage the business. But it's also a disadvantage because it requires a certain level of trust that might not necessarily exist between owners and managers. This leads to an issue called the agency problem. To explore the agency problem, we start with the basic idea that people tend to be self-interested. It's not that wild of a premise. People tend to make decisions that benefit themselves. An issue occurs when the interests of the people in the organization are not all the same. Within a corporation, we have two major players, the managers and the owners. And a manager may have his or her own separate objectives. Maybe she wants to be president one day, so she wants to be out in the public and make her name as big as possible. Or a manager might want a nice, stable career and doesn't want to rock the boat too much. Or a manager might not want to look like the bad guy and wants everyone to look at him as the nice boss. Each of these objectives result in a different set of managerial decisions or actions. The owner of the corporation, the shareholders, they have one single interest. That's maximizing wealth. The only reason they buy shares of a stock in a company is that they expect that it will increase their wealth. You should notice that we have a big conflict here. The owners of the company want one thing, that's maximizing wealth, while managers may want something completely different, like fame or job stability. The fact that owners and managers are different people with different potential objectives leads to what we call the agency problem. When looking at the agency problem, we have two groups of people, the managers, who we're going to call the agents, and the owners, who we're going to call the principals. The principal hires the agent to represent his or her interests. The shareholders are not going to be involved in managing the business, so they hire somebody, a CEO for example, to do it for them. And the shareholders want the CEO to do things which make them happy. That is, they want the CEO to make decisions to increase their wealth. But the principal, the shareholders, have limited information. Since the shareholder isn't directly involved in the managing of the business, he doesn't know what goes on a day-to-day basis. So he has to trust that the CEO is acting appropriately. A problem occurs when the principal and the agent have differing interests. The shareholders want one thing, to increase their wealth, but the manager wants something else. We can solve this problem by making sure that the incentives are set up such that the principal and the agent both end up with their desired outcomes. But solving the problem comes at a price, which is called an agency cost. Let's do an example a little bit outside of the realm of finance to make this concept a little bit clearer. What's a context that you think of when you hear the word agent? For me, it's the sports world with their sports agents. So we have LeBron James here, currently playing for the Los Angeles Lakers. Let's say that after this year, LeBron is free to sign a new contract and play with another team, the Chicago Bulls. Or he could stay with the Lakers. Now, I don't personally know LeBron James, but I do know that he's not a lawyer. So he would probably hire somebody to handle the contract negotiations for him. He would hire an agent. In this scenario, LeBron is the principal, and Jerry Maguire here, he's the agent. Now suppose that the Bulls can afford to pay LeBron $100 million, but the Lakers, they can only afford to pay $75 million. It's in LeBron's best interest to make as much money as possible, so in this scenario, he should go to the Bulls. But the Lakers are desperate to keep him, so they offer his agent a side payment of $5 million if they can get him to sign with the Lakers. The conflict of interest here should be pretty apparent. LeBron wants to increase his wealth, so that should put him with the Bulls. But Jerry Maguire, his agent, also wants to increase his own wealth, so he's going to try to put LeBron with the Lakers. So we have an agency problem. So how can we resolve this problem? Well, we can look at how the agent gets compensated for his work. If he gets a fixed fee from LeBron, let's say $500,000 no matter the outcome, then the agent has the incentive to put him inside a bad contract so that he can get that side payment. But instead, if the agent is compensated with something else, like 10% of the contract value, then LeBron will be put in the best situation possible, which is playing for the Chicago Bulls. As LeBron gets paid more, the agent's going to get paid more. Their incentives are now aligned. But notice what had to occur for this problem to be resolved. LeBron had to pay the agent more money. That's what we're going to refer to as the agency cost. Now let's get back to the corporation. How can we get managers to act in the best interests of the shareholders? Well, just like in LeBron's situation, we need to find some way to align the incentives. Shareholders want to become wealthier, so we need to incentivize managers to take actions to do just that. One of the main ways to do that is with managerial compensation. We can link the manager's pay tightly to the value of the company. That way, when the shareholders get wealthier, the manager gets wealthier. And when shareholders get poorer, the manager gets poorer. This is often done in practice by paying managers with stock options. This statement here by the former chairman of Ford gets right to the spirit of the idea. He required the top managers of Ford to hold stock at least equal to their annual salary because he wanted everyone thinking about the price of Ford stock when they go to work. Manager compensation packages typically consist of a base salary, a cash bonus related to meeting some type of performance objective, and some stock-related payment, usually in the form of options. We can look at Disney to see how the pay of managers line up with what I've been saying. They have a section in their annual report about compensation. Here they discuss equity or stock component of compensation, saying, quote, "The committee structures equity awards to directly reward long-term gains and shareholder value." That's just another way of saying they want to align the incentives. They want to ensure that managers work in the interests of shareholders. And we can look at the pay of Robert Iger, the CEO of Disney, to see how this all fits into play. We see that his total compensation is over $65 million per year. And of that $65 million, only $2.8 million is salary. A huge chunk of his pay, about 66% of it, comes from stock and stock options. So we can see that the way CEOs and other managers are paid is largely influenced by this agency problem. As with most issues, there's some lively debate on the topic of executive compensation. There are arguments that can be made against resolving the agency problem by paying managers in stock. One argument is that the stock value may be largely out of the manager's hands. Take the oil industry, for example. The CEO of an oil company has almost no control over the price of oil. The price of oil is determined by the conditions of the economy. However, the stock value of an oil company is tightly connected to the price of oil. Is it reasonable to tie a manager's objective to something that he or she has no control over? Another argument is that compensating managers with stock may encourage deception, cooking the books, or an overemphasis on short-term performance. If a manager can get his or her company to appear good, then the stock price will go up in the short run. But in the long run, the fraud will be discovered and the short-term stock value will decline, to the detriment of shareholders. Trying to come up with the perfect way to compensate managers is still an open question, but currently, paying them in stock is the most prevalent method to resolve the agency problem. So that's the agency problem in a nutshell. It's one of the fundamental issues that corporations face and an issue that needs to be addressed in order to have a well-functioning economy or well-functioning corporation.